I was covertly anti-authoritarian. I just kind of did everything under the table. I was always trying to understand the system so that you can, once you know the rules, then you can break them.
Yeah.
Tried to find co-founders, and I found that, my female friends didn't want to work in sperm, fair enough. And my male friends also didn't want to work in sperm. He said to me, look, man, enjoy the first few months that you have. And I'm like, why? We have no customers, no revenue, no partners, no nothing. He's like, yes, but he's like, it only ever gets worse.
This is Al Empire. Stories of exceptional Arabs around the world and their journey to the top. So Khaled, introduce yourself in the way that you would, however you'd like.
Oof, that's tough. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I'll go with the simpler version. So my name is Khaled Kteily. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Legacy. We're a male fertility company focused on changing this outdated view that fertility is a women's issue. In doing so, we believe that we're rebalancing responsibilities around family planning. So my family is Palestinian, Lebanese. We're also a little bit Canadian. I like to say that I'm 100% all of the above and 100% bad at math. And currently living in New York and have been running the company since 2018.
My gosh. I know, I think the first question that comes to my mind is how did you even arrive at the topic of male fertility?
Sure. So it's might be shocking. My childhood fantasy was not starting a male fertility company. I wanted to be a football player. But what happened is, so after university, I studied business. I went into management consulting. It's a very kind of traditional, standard, well-followed path. Spent a few years going to far-flung locations all across the US. And I had a project in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I can't tell you what client I was working for, but it was an American airline. Headquartered in Oklahoma. And so I was the youngest person on the team. So we were 4 people on this particular project. And, you have to wake up so early to go to your client site. So we get up at, 6:30 or 7. We're driving to the client site. I'm sitting in the passenger seat of the car, and we decide to make a Starbucks run. So I'm the most junior person, so I offer, let me be the one to go pick up these freshly brewed teas and coffees. Now, the reason I use the term freshly brewed is because freshly brewed for tea means very, very boiling hot water. You'll start to see where this is going. Okay. And so I jump in, I get these teas and coffees. You know those cardboard cup holders they give you? Great. Yeah. So I grab one of those. I go back to the car. I sit back in the passenger seat. And as we're driving back down the highway, I just carry them on my lap. 2 teas, 2 coffees. A car in front of us that is driving on the highway brakes very suddenly. So we brake very suddenly. And what happens is, I actually don't remember that much. I remember 2 things. So I remember as we were braking, seeing the cups tilt over and the lids were starting to come off. And then I remember seeing the liquid just had fallen all over my lap. And it was one of those, it was almost like, what is it? It's like Looney Tunes. When someone runs off a cliff and they don't fall until they look down and realize there's gravity? That's how I felt. I looked down and realized there was liquid, and it was this moment of, uh-oh. So then the pain hits. So I was wearing a full suit and tie. The fabric of the suit was absorbing the scalding hot liquid that had just fallen all over my lap. I jump out of the car. So this part was funny to everyone except me. It's a little funny now in retrospect. I jump out of the car, I rip my pants off, because obviously it's burning me, right? But keep in mind, I'm otherwise wearing full suit and tie. So dress shirt, tie, jacket, dress shoes. So there I am by the side of the highway, grabbing my crotch and basically yelling into the void. And apparently, 10 or 12 cars lined up to watch this crazed man by the side of the highway with no pants on, but otherwise looking ready to go to work. I could have had a Zoom call that day. So I got 2nd-degree burns. It took a month and a half to heal, but thankfully it does heal fully, but it was a very painful experience. And, I joke that wanting to have kids is inherently a very narcissistic practice, because you want creatures that look like the 2 people you love the most in the world. I mean, you're the person you've chosen to be with and yourself. Yeah. And so I'm narcissistic enough to accept that I want little kids who look like me. And so when you have scalding hot liquids near your genitals, you ask yourself the question, thank God it wasn't worse. Yeah. And so fast forward a few months later, I am now living in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I just started my master's degree. And one of my classmates was telling the story about how He had recently gone through a bout of cancer. He had done chemotherapy. And his doctor mentioned to him that before he started chemo, he should freeze his sperm. So I just had this world traumatizing accident. He's talking to me about sperm freezing, a concept I had never heard of before. And I don't know, like, I guess this is the closest thing I have to a light bulb moment, because I turn to him and I say, okay, well, like, can anyone do this? Do I need permission from anyone? Do I need a doctor's note? Can I just go and masturbate anywhere? Like, how does this work? Are there laws
into a freezer
around this?
Yeah.
Yeah, just straight into the freezer. And he's like, no, just, look up the local sperm banks. That's what I did. So I Googled, sperm bank, Cambridge, Massachusetts. I went. It was, and I remember it well, actually, because it was right next door to my favorite Chinese restaurant, the Dumpling House. So it was very kind of sensuous vibes walking in already. It got me ready and raring to go.
Yeah.
So you walk in, and for anyone who hasn't, seen a sperm bank on TV or hasn't experienced it themselves, it is maybe the most awkward experience that you can have as a man. Because you walk in, I remember there was a receptionist loudly asking me these questions, like, so have you had any sexually transmitted infections? I'm like, I don't think so. It's like, when's the last time you had sex with a man? I'm like, I don't think recently, all these things. And she asks, so why are you here? Are you here because you have cancer, because, you're getting a vasectomy, or because you're transitioning to become a woman? And I said, I don't think any of the three. Yeah. I think I'm just doing it proactively. She's like, great, here's your specimen cup. I don't know why they call it the specimen. I always found that kind of queasy. And they lead you to a small room. And the small room, it's about the size of a large closet. It's got a small black leather couch, table, porn magazines, everything's kind of sticky, right? You're sitting there, you turn off the light, you're trying to set a mood, right? There's a remote, you of course don't want to touch anything.
Oh my God.
And I just want to paint this picture because it's important. When you close a door and the door doesn't make it all the way down, so there's a little gap at the bottom?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's light coming from outside and you can see the shadows of people walking by. They're laughing, they're going about their day. And I had about 10 minutes tops to produce the specimen. You're just sitting there visualizing every hairy, bare ass that has ever been there. And so you're performing under pressure. So I had 9 minutes more than I thought I needed. You come out and you hand your specimen cup to the nurse. And then, of course, you have to wait a week for your results. The results don't make any sense. You have to wait a week, to get on the phone with a doctor to understand everything, And so it was this multi-week process, but I remember coming out of it feeling, first of all, it felt like such a profound feeling. Like, I know I will be able to have kids in the future. Right? And like, for a lot of people, it's a very biological instinct, right? I mean, very simply, people are here to have sex and reproduce, right? You can philosophize about why we're here on this planet, but like as organisms, that's our basic reason for being on the planet. So it was a very profound feeling, and I was contrasting that with how awkward and terrible and expensive and weird and specimen related the process was. And I remember thinking to myself, every man should be doing this. If all it takes is for you to masturbate once, right, and pay a few $100s to preserve your ability to have kids for the rest of your life, then shouldn't you? Like, this feels like a no-brainer to me. So this is what set me down the path of starting the company.
Yeah, I have a lot of feelings right now because as like a 35-year-old woman, freezing eggs is something that everyone in my life has already done and that I'm getting really pushed to do, but I'm annoyed because it's very expensive. It's not a pleasant process. And I feel like it's frustrating because I feel like it is my duty that if I want to have kids with my partner, then I don't want like my 39-year-old self to hate my 35-year-old because, whatever, I didn't do it. But also it's a lot of, if me and my partner want to have, it's me. I have to pay the 10K, 15K to put down. I have to pay it's annoying and it's frustrating. And you're telling me that it costs like a couple $100?
Yeah.
But why? Like, why is that so different?
Yeah. So
Why?
I mean, and to your point, I think people underestimate. I mean, it's a surgical procedure. There's a lot of companies coming out now, kind of like a yes, queen, you go, girl, freeze your eggs. It's empowering, and sure, to a certain extent, it is. But on the other hand, you are going for a surgical procedure under anesthesia. You're paying $10,000. I mean, the contrast between the two worlds is so great.
Yeah.
And that's part of what makes us biologically unfair.
Yeah.
And the challenge is just that men produce so much sperm.
Yeah.
Right? There's no extraction necessary for the sperm. You just need a hand and,
A freezer.
I mean, basically, but it's just that men produce so much sperm and are continuing to produce sperm their whole lives, whereas women are born with all the eggs they're ever going to have. But fundamentally, yes, it's very unfair. It is very unfair.
So I think there's a misconception that, men will, that if like a couple can't have kids, that it's usually on the woman, or that men that are healthy have no reason to freeze their sperm. Or, like you said, the only people that are freezing their sperm are, you have cancer and you have vasectomy. So can you help fix this misconception? Because you're saying every man should consider freezing their sperm.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're getting at, by the way, is this very common idea that fertility is a quote unquote women's issue.
Yeah.
And so what we found is, first of all, infertility, right? This is not a sexy topic that you talk about with your friends, right? This isn't like something that you're going to open up to with everyone in your life, but infertility affects about 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 heterosexual couples. And that's why, I mean, if you're in the industry like I am, you start noticing every TV show has at least one episode about a sperm bank or fertility or infertility. It's a very basic human experience.
Yeah.
And we forget about this. And so, first of all, it's much more common than we think. What we found in heterosexual couples, and what's become very clear, is infertility is as likely to come from the male partner as it is from the female partner. And so the stats are, broadly speaking, it's about a third male factor infertility, a third female factor infertility, and about a third that is joint or unexplained. So what this means is, it takes two to tango, right? I mean, it literally takes sperm and an egg to conceive, and it's just as likely for men to be facing male factor infertility as it is for women to be facing female factor infertility.
Yeah, super fascinating. And then, so Khaled, when you decided, okay, this is like something that I would like to change, what is the process between having the light bulb moment and actually establishing a company?
I like this question a lot because it gets to something that a lot of people want to believe. A lot of people will say to themselves like, oh, well, I had this idea, this person just happened to be a few years ahead of me. You'll hear this about companies like Uber or whatever, these very successful companies. Yeah. And what you learn is the idea is almost worthless. The idea is almost meaningless. It all comes down to execution. Are you able to take this vision? Are you able to take what I call the leap of faith and actually leave everything behind, quit your job, move cities, do whatever, and actually start day one by yourself at a coffee shop with a laptop, in my case with a privacy screen because I'm Googling sperm all day and Google thinks I'm an old infertile man, right? Are you able to take that very difficult leap of faith, actually take the risks, start the company, and then go through, the waves of difficulty of building a company from the ground up? And so it's a common, I don't know if it's a misconception, but I think it's easy to want to believe like, oh, I could have done this because I had the same idea, but actually building a company is, can I swear on this podcast?
Sure. Yeah.
It's really fucking hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And so, it takes a lot of, this I can get away with because it's my industry. It takes a lot of balls.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of gumption.
There's a lot of puns you can use on this topic.
They just keep coming. And so it really takes a lot of gumption to just, you have to have this moment where you say, okay, this is it. I'm leaving my old world behind. And I'm starting my new world. And a lot of people try to half-ass it. A lot of people will say, okay, I'm going to do this on the side and, we'll see what happens. The reality is if you are not giving full ass, not half ass, if you're not giving it your all, if it is not your every waking, breathing, living moment of your brain, then you are not going to succeed.
But then, how did you even decide? So you quit your job? Yeah. Is that what happened? But at what point are you like, this is an idea that I am willing to dedicate the next X decades of my life to? And then like, do you just be like, hey, I'm going to peace out to do this?
I'll preface this by saying I had a very funny conversation with my former boss. I was living in Geneva. I was working at the World Economic Forum. I had this wonderful boss called Mirek. And I had to sit down with him one day, and, I was doing quite well, and it was looking like I might be promoted. And him and I were having kind of a serious, we're planning on having a serious conversation about my future at the organization. I sit down with him like, Mirek, I'm quitting to start a sperm company. Like, there's no easy or normal way to say this. I'm just doing it. And what had happened is, 6 or 9 months prior, this major study had come out, like this massive meta study of male fertility studies over the past few decades. And this study found that sperm counts and sperm concentrations have gone down by 50 to 60%.
Oh, interesting.
So huge decline in sperm quality, broadly speaking. And so this was the moment at which, and I remember seeing that study and saying, this is it. Yeah. This is the inflection point, because what's going to happen is the media is going to start reporting about it, because this is interesting, it's novel, it's different. Yeah. And that was the moment at which I said, okay, I need to start preparing to leave my job. And so that's when, I started doing some fundraising. I started going around to my professional network. I raised about $130,000, I think, before I actually quit my job. I was building pitch decks. I was getting the website ready, all of this stuff, before actually making the decision to leave. But I knew that I would be leaving. It's just a few things that I needed to get in order before I could. But I still feel bad to this day for that conversation, because I think I caught him so off guard, and he was such a wonderful manager and a wonderful guy. And I'm like, yep, I'm leaving. I'm quitting. I'm leaving Geneva. I'm moving to Boston. I'm starting a sperm company. I left my cat behind in Geneva, although I did actually go back. I came back to get her. 9 months later, smuggled her into the US.
Really?
I'll share that with you offline.
Offline, yeah. That's great, though. I love smuggling stories. How did you decide on the name Legacy?
Come on, it's a great name. It's a great name.
It is.
I wish I remember. I actually don't remember. I don't even remember if it was my idea or if it was someone else's. I will claim full credit for it. Yeah. I actually honestly don't remember. But what's interesting is the name was so good that we actually had what are called fast followers. So we had like a copycat competitor emerge a few months after us. And I had never trademarked the name Legacy. And so they actually basically ripped off our website, our values, our product, our everything. They also ripped off the name. And so they actually launched basically a clone of us called Legacy. They trademarked the name, which I hadn't done because I'm stupid and I wanted to save $1,000 to anyone listening, pay for the trademark. Yeah. So 3 months later, they launched a competing Legacy. And so, I guess it's testament to the name. It's a good name. Yeah. And also testament to the fact that when you out-execute everybody else, you will win in your space.
It's true, because now people think of Legacy.
We are Legacy. Yeah. We are Legacy.
Did you sue them ever?
We went through a very convoluted multi-year. They sent us a cease and desist, which was wild. We had to countersue. It actually was a wild story. I had to tap into my network of lawyers. We retained a law firm called Quinn Emanuel, who are known for being one of the top litigators in the United States.
My gosh.
The partner there basically did it practically pro bono. I had to take all the money I had raised and give it to them as a retainer. It's like $100,000 retainer, which when you're a multi-million-dollar startup, sure. But when you have just, you're a few months in, that was almost all the money I had in the bank. But I was so protective of the name. And I'm like, what am I going to call it? Dynasty, Heritage. There were some other decent names. None had the strength of the name Legacy. Yeah. Because why are we all here? We want to leave a positive legacy on the world. Yeah. So,
I want to back up a little bit before Legacy to talk about like how you grew up and also, where you went to university and that kind of thing. But I actually want to start in your childhood. Okay. And I want to ask, like, you have an older brother, like what every sibling has like a little bit of a reputation for something. Like, what was your reputation as a kid?
Great question. One of my favorite things to ask someone is if they are, like, what birth order they are. Yeah. Because I think this actually shapes so much about you. And I will, okay. I actually have a nice way of putting it. So my great grandmother was very authoritarian. Okay. Which meant that my maternal grandfather was also very authoritarian. He grew up that way. It's what he knew. which made his daughter, my mom, also very authoritarian. What's interesting for my brother and I's generation, we went the other way. We became super anti-authoritarian.
Yeah.
We were like rebelling against the regime, right? Which for any Arab, I think that sounds familiar. What's interesting is we did it in two very different ways. So my brother was overtly anti-authoritarian. So even in high school, he would argue with all the teachers. They hated him. I actually remember we had a high school teacher who literally told him once to shut the F up in the middle of class to one of her students. But that's how obnoxious and annoying and anti-authoritarian he was. I was covertly anti-authoritarian, you know? I just kind of did everything under the table. I was always trying to understand the system so that you can, you know, once you know the rules, then you can break them.
Yeah.
So we turned out very differently as a result. But I find it fascinating that we turned out the way we did because of our mom, because of her dad, because of his mom. So literally this was the legacy that was passed down to us. But I'm the younger brother. So I'm cute, I'm charming, I get away with things.
Yeah.
He's the older sibling. So he bears the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's much more serious. So he got the brains, but I got the charm.
Yeah, for sure. But we were just talking ahead of this interview, but can you tell us a little bit actually about your mom?
Yeah, my mom is a force of nature. She was terrifying when we were kids. We love her very much now and even then. So what I find interesting about my mom's story, she grew up quite smart. She went to the London School of Economics. She worked in healthcare and public administration for some time. But my brother and I, believe it or not, were really difficult kids to raise. And I remember there was this period we were studying for a brevet. And my brother and I basically alternated between being good students and bad students. So there's a period where my grades were on the decline. I was getting C's all of a sudden. She quit her job to basically stay home, and she would teach me every night at the kitchen table, tarikh, geography, and so on, like history and geography and so on. Every day she would beat me over the head with it, sometimes literally beat me over the head with it. And so she spent years basically getting us back onto a decent track. And what's interesting is I don't think we would have ended up on positive tracks had it not been for the sheer force of will of our mother. And so she left her job for a while. She took on various roles. So she worked for the Institute for Palestine Studies. She worked in human rights work. She then did a mid-career master's at the Harvard Kennedy School. So she spent a year there. She actually followed me 2 years later.
Oh my God.
We call it the reverse legacy. And then she started her own startup in the menopause space. So she runs a company called Womenese, which is meant to help women navigate menopause naturally. Now a topic I'm extremely knowledgeable about. I was their first investor. I am their biggest advisor and I believe biggest supporter.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
We have very weird conversations around the dinner table because I'm talking about sperm. She's talking about menopause. You haven't lived till you've heard your mother use the phrase vaginal dryness. Talk about
great.
trauma.
I love that. I would pay money to. It's amazing. Yeah. I asked about your mom because I saw on your website you have a picture of you of her graduation.
Her graduation.
Yeah, which I thought was so beautiful. It was really sweet. Yeah. Okay, so you graduated high school from the same school I went to, which was in Beirut, the American Community School. And then what happened?
Yeah. What happened? So my graduating class was 67 people. I got accepted to McGill. 2006 was the year we had war in Lebanon. And I remember distinctly, actually, I had to escape Beirut through Syria, right? We were like smuggled in a taxi. A lot of smuggling stories. Smuggled in a taxi, middle of the night. And actually, I want to go on a brief side note to tell you one of my favorite stories of all time, because I've never told this story
I love it.
on a podcast before. It's one of my favorites. So we were, so it was kind of crisis time in Beirut. Bombs had just started dropping. They had practically bombed our house. Our parents were in Canada. So it was just my brother and myself. I was 17, he was 19. So, we're kids. Our parents are terrified. We pack our bags. We go, we stock up on supplies. We pack emergency bags. And so we ended up going to stay with family in the north of Lebanon where it was safer. We agreed that we'll spend one night there because the next morning there was a taxi driver who was a friend of a friend of a friend kind of situation, had agreed to take us across the border to Syria to safety. We had no idea who this guy was. All we know is it was it's like 3 or 4 in the morning. We get into the backseat of his taxi. We barely have any bags with us because we had taken the bare essentials.
Yeah.
And we start driving. And as we're driving, it's like, yes, they were just bombing here 1 hour ago. And we're like, okay, well then drive faster, man, drive faster. So anyway, as we're driving and we're going towards the border with Syria, he makes a pit stop. And he makes a pit stop to buy some Arabic bread.
Yeah.
And okay, sure. My brother and I look at each other like, okay, the guy's hungry, okay. And so, he picks it up, he puts it in the passenger seat. We're sitting in the back, keep driving. And then he makes another pit stop and he picks up some orange juice. We're like, all right, brother is thirsty. It's okay, whatever, that's fine. And again, like we have no idea where we are. This is before cell phones were that ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And so, he makes a second pit stop and then he keeps driving and makes a third pit stop to buy baklava. And we're like, bro, now is not the time for some delicious Lebanese sweets.
Yeah.
Save it for later, bro. And we're there and we're like, do we get out of the car? What do we do? This guy's insane. And we're going to the Syrian border. We are at war and this man is stopping to pick up pastries.
Right.
And so we drive to the border and we get there and the lines of cars are hours long. Everybody was trying to escape Beirut at that point, of course, because you wanted to go somewhere safe. And so he actually drives right past the entire line and he goes up to the very front and he goes right up to the border guard and he's like, Hussein, Habibi, how are you doing? Gives him the baklava.
There you go.
Drives to the second border crossing. He's like, oh, Muhammad, Habibi, how are you doing? Gives him the orange juice. Goes to the third one. He's like, Khalil, brother, how are you doing? Gives him the Arabic bread. And we made it across that border in like 15 minutes flat. We ran to a hotel. We managed to find like the last hotel room in all of Damascus. And that is how we actually ended up escaping from the country.
That's incredible.
So till this day, but just the moment we're looking at ourselves like this guy's buying orange juice.
Yeah.
Now is not the time. And yes, they were just bombing here 30 minutes ago. We will drive fast. So all this say 2006, we escaped Lebanon. I at the time was deciding between the American University of Beirut or McGill, which is, the decision ended up becoming much easier for me. Made the move to Montreal, basically had my one bag, and that was the new life that I started.
Wow.
And McGill was amazing because coming from a school of 67 people in my graduating class where everyone knows everything about everyone, people know, dumb things that you did in 4th grade and whatever, to McGill, which has tens of thousands of students. And there was nobody else from my grade who was going to McGill. And it was, I remember walking down kind of the main gate area and just feeling this amazing sense of liberation. Like, I'm free. I'm anonymous. I can be whoever I want to be. And that was probably the biggest turning point in my life, that moment of, okay, I can now be who I want to be, not just who I felt I had to be for so many years. So I spent 4 years at McGill, graduated during the financial crisis. So I actually delayed my graduation for a year to learn French. My French now is a very bastardized, like Quebecois, a little bit of, it's like a very strange mixed French. Spent 4.5 years there. Did management consulting for a few years. And so again, that's a very, standard, typical path, what you do after you study business.
Yeah.
Had a life crisis, quit my job to go work with the UN. I thought that, for a man working at UN Women would actually be very important. And it was a period of my life where I learned about things like intersectionality, right? Which for me, and it's funny, my friends laugh in my face when I say this.
Yeah.
For me, it was like, wow, what a cool new term. And, and every female friend I had was like, yeah, you're a freaking moron for not knowing this already. Learned that the UN was not what I wanted to do with my life. Yeah. So I applied to do my master's in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. So I was fortunate enough to get in. I got a full scholarship, so I didn't have to pay for a single dollar, which was amazing.
Do you remember what your personal essay was that made them give you a full scholarship?
Yes, and actually there's one person in particular, a guy called Saad Atchan, who was a friend of my brother's. They'd done their PhD at Harvard together, and he helped me fine-tune my essay. And it's so funny because these elite institutions, they're looking for certain vocabulary. They're looking for certain words. And I remember Saad helped me sprinkle in words like social consciousness, and construct, and all of these things, which made it sound much more profound. But what I had written in the essay, and what is still very much true, is I ultimately want to be involved in human rights, ideally, hopefully around Palestine. At the time, I think I said that I wanted to work at the UN, which definitely was not true.
Yeah.
But they know that. They know that. They don't actually expect you to follow through on what you write in your essay. They just want you to have been thoughtful about a possible career path and how the master's would fit in.
Yeah.
So did my 2 years there.
It's quite rare, though, to get a full scholarship at Harvard.
It was cool, yeah. It was about 10% of our class got full scholarships. And honestly, it's freeing, right? It's freeing because you can graduate and you can do whatever it is that you want to do. I mean, I have friends who graduated from undergrad or grad school with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. I mean, you're chained for the rest of your life. So it definitely was very special. We got to join something called the Center for Public Leadership, where we got trained by some of the best professors on leadership, decision making, speech making, all of that good stuff.
Okay, and then you ended up. I mean, that was in policy, right?
So that was in policy, exactly. And so when it came time to graduate, so I'd had an amazing 2 years. When it came time to graduate, I asked myself, okay, well, what do I want to do with my life? I didn't know at that point. And so I got offered this job at the World Economic Forum in Geneva to work on the Middle East team. And I thought, you know what? I'll be in Europe. I'll be a little closer to my family. I'd never lived in Europe before. Switzerland has this mystique as a country as well. Everything is precise and runs on time, and kind of the polar opposite of Lebanon. Yeah. And so spent a couple years there, and that's ultimately what started my journey towards legacy. Incredible.
When you started Legacy, Khaled, did people think
I was insane?
Yeah.
Dana, do you know how many sperm jokes I have received over the course of my life?
You can make a joke book as like a gift, as part of your gift package.
Oh my God.
Or do you have like the best ones?
There's a lot of good ones. Ideally, I'll throw them in mid-conversation.
Okay.
Those are, the best ones are ones where the other person doesn't even notice that you've done it. So I've thrown in a couple already.
Okay.
And there were a lot of people who were close in my life. I mean, the person I was with at the time, I remember, told me, she said, I believe you're going to be successful, but not with this idea. And I had a lot of people in my life. I mean, my colleagues thought I was absolutely insane. I actually did a presentation to my colleagues. I rallied like 10 or 12 people. We booked off a conference room. I gave them the pitch. And they were like, that's great for you, going into the sperm business. Like, it was just such a radical departure from everything I had been doing. But what I think they didn't understand was I had been thinking about this idea for years. I had been studying sperm. I had been researching the idea. I had really thought this out. And I don't think that I'm like I think I'm a one-hit wonder when it comes to entrepreneurship. Like, this is my good idea. I have no other good ideas. It's not me being humble or modest, just factually. I don't know if I could do anything else, just sperm. That's it. That's the one great idea that I had. And I never wavered for a second. That's what's wild.
Yeah.
I wavered around where to do it or when to do it, like what day exactly, but it was not an if, it was a when. And so, everyone told me I was nuts. And I'm going to butcher this quote, but it's like, first they laugh at you. Okay, no, I'm totally going to butcher it. But it's a quote to the effect that people will think you're crazy until you do it, and then they're going to tell you that you were smart to have done it.
Yeah.
But those same people didn't believe that you would be able to pull it off.
Yeah. Was it hard for, like, how did you cope emotionally, I think, with being, I'm sure it's quite isolating to sit with this idea.
Yeah, and I was a solo founder, actually, which wasn't something I wanted. I tried to find co-founders, and I found that my female friends didn't want to work in sperm, fair enough, and my male friends also didn't want to work in sperm, and I didn't come from a particularly entrepreneurial network, so I ultimately had to do it by myself. And I think what helped, again, it's crazy if you look back at my pitch decks from late 2017, right? We're talking 4.5 years later. It's basically the same idea, basically the same company, basically the same everything. I was just so fixated, and I knew what it needed to look like. And so I actually didn't find it that lonely because I knew what I was doing. I knew why it mattered. I knew that it would be, or I believed it would be successful. Yeah. And I'm lucky to have a very expansive network of people who have just been, over the years, have been supporters. I started a mailing list. It sounds so silly, but I would send monthly updates to friends and family, right? Like, we got a new intern, we got a $1,000 grant, we're getting sued by another legacy, whatever, these updates. And through that, I think you build a lot of trust and goodwill because people see that you really are giving it your all. But I think I was fortunate not to have really felt lonely in the journey because I was so convinced, still am, by the way, so convinced that this is going to be a massive multi-billion-dollar industry. And my job is to make sure that it is legacy that is leading the way.
Yeah. When it came to going from this idea and starting the company, what steps did you take? I know every company is different, but did you start with building a team? Did you and then promise them money later? Did you start raising money immediately? And what was that process like?
Yeah, it all came quickly. So it started with needing to fundraise some money. And so I figured, look, I had a pension of $17,000. And because I always read all the rules and regulations, I learned that if you move outside of Europe, they actually will give you your entire pension back to you, cash, lump sum, with basically no taxes. And so what I did is for the year prior to leaving, I started putting as much money as I could into my pension because I wouldn't be taxed on it. Long story short, ended up with $17,000, took that out, and I'm like, this is what I will be living on for the next 6+ months. Fine. But if I want my company to actually take off and thrive, I need funds. And so I was already traveling around for work, started letting people in my professional network know, hey, I'm starting this idea, I'm starting this company. And I basically just pitched 20 or 30 people. And it's actually incredible because there was, I'll name some names. There was a guy called Karim Aita. So I'm sitting at coffee with him and another woman called Hiba Darwish. We're sitting at coffee and, I basically had a nice looking pitch deck and a commitment to the idea. And the three of us are having coffee and he's like, look, man, I love the idea. Can I invest? What's the valuation? And in my head, I'm like, I have no fucking idea what the valuation is. But I liked the idea of having $1 million company. That just sounded good. So I'm like, look, it's $20,000 for 2% of the company. He's like, done. And then Hiba's like, wait, hang on. I want in as well. I'm like, okay, fine. It's $20,000 for 2% of the company. She's like, great, done. And so we literally took out napkins. I always keep a pen on me. And we signed the napkins. Literally it was like $20,000 for 2%, Karim. And I did another one for him. I still have those pieces of paper.
Oh my gosh.
And that is actually how I ended up getting my very, very first funding. Karim ultimately didn't end up investing. He regrets it to this day. But Hiba did. And so that actually set off additional fundraising because I realized, okay, well, people are saying yes to the $1 million valuation. And so the next time someone said they wanted to invest, they asked at what valuation? I'm like, $2 million. And then they said, okay. And I'm like, great, I'm not asking for enough. So the next person who asked, I'm like, $3 million. And this is the first point I started to get a little bit of pressure. I'm like, I'm going to keep pushing. And so I ended up raising at a 1 million valuation, 2 million, 3 million, then 5 million, and then ultimately 8 million valuation. And there's a few, fundraising tactics to be able to do that. But ultimately you need to create FOMO. From people who feel like, there's one slot left. If they don't get it, it's over for them. And so this was kind of the process of fundraising that initial $130,000. So that's kind of one part because with money in the bank, suddenly, you know that you'll be able to afford to live. And as long as you are all in, the company will stay alive.
Yeah.
The second is then, okay, well, you need to build a website, you need to build a brand, you need to think through what are your values? And this is a very under-considered element of starting a company. Yeah. I made an employee handbook before I had any employees, which sounds insane. But actually, I'm like, here are the things that I stand for, and here are the things that I stand against. So that was number 2, being thoughtful about what kind of company do I want to build? Because it's easy to get very focused on I want to build a multi-billion-dollar company. But most companies won't. But if you are ever going to get there, you want to have built a good foundation today.
Yeah.
Instead of 2 or 3 years in being like, shit, we don't have any real values. I need to do this now. And so that was second, which was being thoughtful about what kind of company do I want to build. And the third came down to hiring. If you're a solo founder, the hardest hire is the first person.
Yeah.
So what I did is I found interns. So the Harvard School of Public Health was giving interns the opportunity to get some money while working at startups. So I took advantage of that. I found a guy in Geneva who was a PhD who thought the topic was cool and wanted to do some research. And so I cobbled together, and there's no other way to do it in the early days. You are cobbling in the most inelegant way all the pieces of the puzzle that you need to start building, start drawing a picture.
Yeah.
And then finally was introduced to someone who ended up becoming employee number 1. So that was 3. And then 4th was, I know that I'm in an industry that is inherently, it's interesting. Like sperm, it makes people laugh, it makes people cry, it makes people, it has a lot of effects on a lot of people. You need it to create life, right? And so even at the time, I knew I needed to make sure that we had media coverage, that we needed awards, that we needed to be out there talking to the press. And so part 4 was I applied to every award, every nomination, every competition, everything, because I knew that that's what would help us get into the mainstream media. Like, we're not building a business to business enterprise resource planning software.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is sperm. It's 10 billion times more interesting. And so I'll tell you one story just about the press and coverage.
Yeah.
So actually, I'll tell you 2.
Yes.
So we actually were reached out to in July 2018, 2 months after I started the company, by a reporter from the New York Times who said, "Hey, I've been researching sperm. Can I quote you?" And so 2 months after starting the company, I was in the New York Times, and she asked, "How many customers do you have?" I'm like, "We have less than 1,000."
Yeah.
Which was technically accurate because we had 0.
Well done. I love that.
Nelly, if you're listening, I'm sorry. And so fast forward a few months. So the biggest startup competition is called TechCrunch Disrupt. They do something called Startup Battlefield. You apply months in advance, you get selected. They pick 12 startups to come and compete. So TechCrunch Disrupt happens in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, and all over the world. And so I actually applied to 3 of them. So I applied to TechCrunch North America because I was living in Boston. I applied to TechCrunch Middle East. I just put our house here as our, office space. Yeah. And I applied to TechCrunch Europe saying, well, I was just living in Switzerland. So we were kind of a Swiss company at the time. So didn't get into the first 2, but I got an email from TechCrunch in Europe saying, "Hey, look, you weren't selected for the battlefield, but we think you're one of the interesting companies. We'll give you free tickets to attend."
Oh, interesting.
I'm like, okay, you know what? Good. I'll see what I can do, plant some seeds, drum up some interest, what have you.
Yeah.
So I call up my cousin who's living in London. I say, "Kalim, how do you feel about a trip to Berlin?"
Yeah.
He says, "I feel great about a trip to Berlin." I'm like, "Great." So of course I started making all these plans to see friends and go out and all the things that you would do in Berlin.
Yeah.
As I'm landing in Berlin airport, it's 8 p.m. I get an email titled, "Congratulations, you have been selected as the wild card." What I did not know was that every year, 12 startups are selected months in advance and have months to prepare. And then the day before the competition starts, they select one more startup as the 13th wild card startup.
Oh, wow.
And
Wait, okay. What does that mean?
Yeah. So they send me an email saying, "Show up tomorrow morning, ready to compete against the other 12 startups. Show up with a 7-minute pitch and a set of slides ready to present to an audience of thousands."
Oh my gosh.
And I remember this feeling like, okay, my life has led up to this moment. This is it. I can do this.
I can do this.
I call up my friend Rami Karabibat. I call him up. He's in Montreal. I'm like, "Rami, I need your help. Like, you're 7 hours behind me. Can you help me put some slides together?" He's like, "I got you. Don't worry about it." I wake up the next morning at 6 a.m. I'm exhausted. I've been traveling, all this stuff. He sent me his slides. I get the pitch ready. I'm like, "Let's go and do this." So I go, I pitch 7 minutes. And the pitch, at the time we were called, or our tagline was, "The Swiss private bank for your most valuable assets."
Oh, great. That's great.
That was coming from Switzerland.
Amazing.
And,
Yeah.
The problem is when I moved to the US, I realized that Americans associate Switzerland with tax evasion. And so
okay.
the symbolism was a little bit lost in
Don't want to
translation.
smuggle the sperm. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're not going to smuggle it anywhere. But I get up on stage and I say, "Look, for the next 7 minutes, I'm going to talk about assets and investments and deposits without ever referring to the financial industry." And I give them the pitch for legacy. And we won. And there's a joke on my team till today because, there was a very legitimate judging panel of some like top VCs, top reporters who were there. And one of the questions that I got from one of the judges was, "Okay, this is great. So how many customers do you have?" The answer, of course, was 0. And it's funny because you see me and like there's a high quality video of me out there.
I've seen the video actually. Yeah.
I'm like, "I don't want to talk about customers. Let's talk about conversations." We've had thousands of conversations with men who are so excited about this. And he was like, "Uh-huh, sure,
Yeah.
sure." But, we ended up winning. And that was what triggered kind of the beginning of the press coverage, because suddenly we were on the first page of TechCrunch, which is, the startup journal that startups dream of being on. We were there. And again, it's sperm. People commented, people shared, people liked, people whatever. Yeah. And that's what set off, I think, a lot of the coverage, because that's when the initial inbounds came in from venture capitalists who were basically saying, hey, sperm, this is fascinating. Can I possibly invest? Incredible. So all this to say, those were the four, you get a little bit of the money, you think about what kind of company you want to build, you start bringing people on board, and then you get the media coverage that you need.
Yeah. And where are you today in the process, Khaled? Like, how big is Legacy, and what are you looking forward to?
Yeah. Well, we've now raised about $45 million from investors like Bain Capital Ventures, First Mark Capital, really some phenomenal investors. We went through a program called Y Combinator, which has, is a very, very low acceptance rate. So we've raised a good amount of money. We're about 50 folks, give or take, today. So that's spread across the US, some folks in Canada, South Africa, Colombia, Romania, a few other countries. And we've grown quickly. I mean, we grew 7x in 2020. During COVID, a lot of fertility clinics shut down. And so a lot of folks use our service. In 2021, we tripled our revenue again. 2022, we're growing. And so it's been, again, knock on wood, we've been fortunate to grow quite quickly. We've been fortunate to raise a good amount of money. What I'm proudest of the most is, I talked about values, and this is something that I worked on in 2018.
Yeah.
You can ask any single person at Legacy, what are our values? And they know them by heart. And maybe this is from, my mom teaching me the kitchen table back in 8th grade, where she'd beat me over the head until I had everything memorized. Everyone has these memorized. We have 5 values, right? Like, you're customer-centric, you're reliable, you're kind, you're open, and you're a winner. You ask people, what are our mission? Our mission is to humanize the path to parenthood for all. What is our vision? Our vision is to unlock sperm as a biomarker of health. And one of the things that I love is, not only have we now helped tens of thousands of people either have kids or preserve their ability to have kids, but we've built this team of 50 who know why we're here, what we're doing, why it matters, what the big vision is, and are so aligned with the values that, we had initially set out years and years ago. Yeah. And so that's honestly one of the things that I'm proudest of. We have a very, very strong culture. And that's honestly one of the most rewarding feelings you can possibly have.
I was reading one of your Medium blogs actually about culture and about how you hire. No, it was amazing, because I could feel the pride about the company that you've built, and also the team that you've built, and how you talk about, talent density and the importance of hiring people. I mean, the different models that you took from different companies, and ultimately what you chose as your company. And I wonder if you could talk to me a little bit about that, and how you personally decided that this is how I'm going to run my company, and these are the kinds of people I'm going to hire versus, the more traditional path, I would say.
Yeah, this is what I think about all the time. And so when I was at McGill, I did a triple concentration. I did finance, I did management information systems, and I did organizational behavior. So the idea was, if I'm ever running a company or building a company, you need to understand the numbers, you need to understand the technology, and you need to understand the people. But organizational behavior, or OB, which is really just psychology of the workplace, is the one class that I loved. I could not get enough of. And I knew then, at an intellectual academic level, I knew, and I could have recited to you without deeply understanding it, you are your people. Your company is your people. No more, no less. But it's not until you're actually living it yourself and you're hiring, and you see the difference between hiring a high performer or an okay performer or a poor performer. It's a totally different world. And when you're a company of 5 people, each person is 20% of the company. And in fact, the first 10 people you hire are setting the foundation for the next 50 people you're going to hire, who in turn are going to set the foundation for the 500 people that you hire. And so if you're not super thoughtful about it from an early on stage, it will come back to bite you in the ass. And so this whole idea of talent density, which I totally stole from Netflix, by the way, is this idea that more people does not necessarily lead to more output. And in fact, the more people you have, the more organizational complexity you have. Yeah. You suddenly need to implement a layer of middle management. It's just, you think about, all these different nodes that now need to be in contact with one another. It's much easier to stay in contact when you're 5 people than it is when you're 50 people. So the concept of talent density is, you are hiring fewer but better people who are just A players. And it's something that we pride ourselves a lot on. I mean, I don't like it when companies talk about how competitive their jobs are, because I think that that's a false statistic. But I will say our jobs are very, very competitive. We've had some roles where there's like 8 rounds of interviews, and we had dozens of candidates go through those interviews in order to ultimately land a job at Legacy. And we're lucky to be able to do that because we do have great investors. We have gone through great accelerators. We have raised a good amount of money. And so it's I think of it as a virtuous cycle that allows us to attract great talent. And I'll give one great example, which is we hired someone from a company called Smile Direct Club. So Smile Direct Club is a consumer health company that is basically a subscription service for you to fix your teeth. But it went public. It was very successful. We poached someone from Smile Direct Club, brought them over to Legacy. She then introduced us to the person who later became our head of engineering, so our most senior person of engineering. And because he knew her, he trusted her opinion, he was 10 times more likely to join us. And so this is, there's so much that is under the surface that you wouldn't think about, but it really comes down to being super thoughtful about who you're hiring, how you're hiring, and doing that as early as possible, because you are laying the foundation for the company you will be 5 or 10 years down the line.
We all know that starting a company, you've said it's fucking hard, and I believe you. In those, in the toughest moments, who is the first person that you generally call, or what is the thing that you tend to do to kind of make things a little better?
I have my life mantra is very simple. It's sleep well and hydrate. And so whenever I'm in a bad mood, I go to bed. I sleep. And so, recently went through a tough time, slept 13 hours and emerged from it a new man, or at least that's kind of how it felt. Yeah. So that helps a lot. You have to think a lot about your mental health. One of my kind of early mentors is a founder called Karan Soroya, who founded a company called Cover, which is in the insurance tech space. And when I first started Legacy, he said something to me that I retain. This is not fun advice, by the way, but he said to me, "Look, man, enjoy the first few months that you have." And I'm like, "Why? We have no customers, no revenue, no partners, no nothing." Yeah. He's like, "Yes, but," he's like, "it only ever gets worse." It's like, so appreciate the times that you have now. And it's crazy because obviously the time I'm like, "You're insane. I'm going to work my butt off," whatever. And I did. But I look back, I'm like, wow, those really were the good old days. It really only does ever get worse. Yeah. Because, when you raise more money, that's great. But it now means you have larger investors and you're running board meetings, and you have more people, and people have a lot of feelings. And, but people do. A company is people, and people are feelings. And so running a company is just managing everyone's emotions. Yeah. And so you just end up with challenges just at a larger scale. That's all. So you have to be very thoughtful about how you stay sane, especially during the tough times. My first call is honestly my brother. My brother Noor. He's a professor. He's very smart. He never bullshits. He loves to put me down. And so that's just, I think, as my older brother. But what's nice is, I take everything he says at face value. I know he has my best interests at heart. I don't have to second guess that. Yeah. He's very honest with me. If he thinks I'm being a moron, he tells me. And if he thinks it's a good idea, he will tell me. Yeah. And so talking through problems with him has actually been super valuable for me.
Yeah, that's very sweet. Yeah. So Khaled, one thing that we ask everyone is well, first, kind of, if you can reminisce, do you remember how you made your first $100 alone?
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah. With Legacy?
With Legacy or even before? Yeah.
Ever? Oh, ever is easy. We would spend summers in Montreal, and back in Beirut, we didn't have good internet. We were still on the right? Like dial-up, 56K dial-up. Yeah. And so I would go to Montreal and I would burn, what was it? Was it Dawson's Creek? Yeah. I would burn CDs. I would download Dawson's Creek. Obviously, everyone was on the Pirate Bay at that point. Yeah. Illegally download everything, burn them onto CDs, came back to Beirut, and I sold them.
What?
Yeah. Because hey, you want the entire season for, 10,000 lira, whatever. And that's how I made my first chunk of money.
That is amazing.
Arbitrage.
Was it just that show? Yeah. Or were
there were a few others. No, there was, what was the Superman show?
You know the one I'm Roswell or something.
No, not Roswell. I can't remember, but there were a few that I would burn and I would bring back, and I would either give them away or sell them to people.
So how do you find people to buy those?
Because people loved Dawson's Creek.
So like, where would
Yeah.
you say like, hey, I have a copy of
Yeah. I was like one of those shady people, I had a little booklet of CDs, like, what you need? I have, you want Superman, you want Creek, you want whatever, Friends, it's all good.
That's amazing.
So that's how I made my first little bit of money. The second, actually, okay, I'll tell you 3 stories. So
Yeah.
this is the first one. The second is, I told you that I love to read the rules and regulations, and because that's how you figure out how to work within a system.
Yeah.
It was actually at our high school. There was a organization that basically did an essay writing competition to write about like democracy and whatever. And you could tell it was people who wanted, Arabs to write glowingly about democracy.
Yeah.
And so the award for winning was $1,000. I'm like, there is no way anyone is going to submit because this is a dumb topic and nobody is going to be bothered, but I'm bothered. And so I wrote the essay. Only 3 people submitted. I ended up being selected basically by the process of elimination.
Yeah.
And I got $1,000 grant, which at the time was an insane amount
Huge.
of money for an
Yeah.
8th grader.
Yeah.
I remember taking a photo, I fanned them out and I took a photo and I got $1,000. So that was the second. And then at Legacy, I can't share his name for confidentiality, but our first actual customer, our first, he was a real person who did this for a real reason. And I remember reaching out to him very casually. I'm like, oh, hey, blank. We'll call him Bob, right? I'm like, hey, Bob, would love to get on the phone. We like to do this with all of our customers and to learn a little bit more. He, of course, was our only customer. And he explained, he's like, yep, I think it's a great idea. It's an insurance policy. I want to have kids someday. And I'm like, yeah, great, thanks. You're one of the many conversations we are having today. Thousands of conversations. And that is one of the best feelings of all time. The only other best feeling was when we hit $1 million in revenue. Because when you bring in $1 million, that means you've built a product that people really want.
Yeah.
That was a very special feeling.
And in many ways, if I can piggyback off of that, you have transformed the dark room with sticky magazines into something else, something kind of slick and nice and a really nice, is it still a box? And Can you talk about that? How you've transformed that weird experience?
Yeah, look, if you want to lock yourself in a room with some sticky magazines, you now have the option to. It's optional, not mandatory. So the way that Legacy works is you'd go on the website, givelegacy.com. You would purchase one of our kits, and so we will actually overnight it to you. So you will actually get a kit at home the next day. And it comes with a few different, technological components to it, but fundamentally it's, the deposit cup for you to ejaculate into, and then it comes with a sperm preservative that keeps your sperm alive during transit. So, you do your thing however you want, wherever you want, whenever you want, at home. You produce a sperm sample, you add the preservative, you put it back in the kit, you then scan a QR code on the kit. We come to your house, we pick it up, we send it to our lab. We do a full semen analysis, like clinic grade semen analysis. We test for DNA damage, and then we will send it off to be frozen. And so the whole idea is all you have to do is masturbate.
Yeah.
It's like just add water. It's like
exactly.
Just add semen, basically.
Yeah.
And we take care of the rest. And then, you're paying $100 or so a year to know that you will be able to have children in the future, no matter what.
Yeah.
And so that's how it works. And the nice thing is, so we operate across the United States. We're not international yet. But you can even get insurance coverage. We're working with most major employers at this point, a lot of major tech companies whose names you would know. We work with the military. So, we freeze a sperm of, elite special ops like Navy SEALs, for example, who obviously are exposed to risks when they're, in combat or what have you.
Yeah.
And so, there's a plethora of options that you have if you want to protect and preserve your fertility.
Yeah. One thing I kind of want to end on is the sperm itself, and how you often say that it's like a metric for health, and this is not just about fertility. It can also give you metrics for other things in your life. And can you tell me more, like what can a sperm teach us about ourselves or men and ultimately life? What is the lesson?
In a way, sperm is life. So actually sperm is teaching you about your ability to create life. So sperm is, a lot of people don't know, it's a biomarker of your health. Your sperm quality is very closely correlated with your overall health and lifestyle. And so, your sperm quality is a predictor for cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. There's actually a study that showed that men with abnormal semen parameters were twice as likely to die in an 8-year period. So it actually predicts your mortality, it predicts your longevity, it predicts your legacy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's why our vision is to unlock sperm as a biomarker of health, because you don't have to go get a blood test. You don't have to give a urine sample. You can literally just masturbate at home and get kind of a health checkup. It is the most enjoyable procedure you will go through, with or without a doctor.
Without the sticky, or maybe sticky magazines, who knows? On kind of a final note, I want to ask, this is, we usually ask, like, what would be the first two lines of your obituary, but for you, I'm going to ask, what would
you came too soon.
What? There you go. That's good, actually. What do you want your own, very cheesy question, your own legacy to be?
Ooh. Okay, I will give you a serious answer, which is, I think building a business that is successful is only valuable to the world. I mean, look, you can make money. Great. You can be able to provide for yourself and your family. Nobody needs private jets or exotic cars or whatever. You need the fundamentals. You need a nice place to live. You need furniture, clothes, food, roof over your head, all that stuff. So I think that wanting to build a multi-billion-dollar business, which I very much do and believe that legacy will be, is not at all about making money. It is about actually helping people choose how and when to have families on their own terms. Yeah. Right? I think to actually have a mission that positively impacts the world. And then if a byproduct of that is you do become financially successful, to be able to put those resources to humanitarian work to actually make the world a better place. And what I learned, and again, this funnily enough goes back to what I wrote in my Harvard Kennedy School essay and my time at the UN, is I realized that, a lot of power and influence actually comes from having power and influence.
Exactly.
And the wealth and the money behind it. And we know that this is the way the world works. And it's very easy to get focused on, here are the morals that I have and we're morally just. I'm like, that's all fine. But if you don't actually have the resources and the network and the influence to change anything, then nothing's going to change, or at least not for a very long time. And so I think that an interesting byproduct of building a successful business is being able to shape the world positively from a humanitarian context.
It's really beautiful.
No.
Is there anything else that you would like to say that I haven't already asked you? Oof. That you think is important for people listening to know?
I want everyone to think about their favorite sperm pun.
Mm-hmm. Email them to you.
Yeah, and they can tag us on Twitter @Legacy.
That's great.
Yeah.
Do you guys have fun hashtags?
I hope that you will say that this podcast is coming soon. Sorry, not sorry.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Khaled.
Thank you, Dana.
Thanks. Amazing. High five.
Did we nail it?
So proud of you. Yeah.